Welcome to the League of Women Voters of Snohomish County Forum for candidates for representative for Legislative District 38, Position 1. I'm your moderator, Vicki Roberts-Gassler, member and past president of the League of Women Voters of Snohomish County. The candidates for Legislative District 38, Position 1 are Julio Cortes, Gary Kemp, DARYL Williams, and Bert Johnson. As always, the League has invited all candidates. Bert Johnson and Gary Kemp will not be joining us today. The League thanks all the candidates for running for office, for their willingness to serve the community if elected, and for participating in this forum. It is the policy of the League to be nonpartisan. Therefore, we neither endorse nor oppose candidates or parties. We do take positions on issues which we have studied and on which we have reached consensus. Ground rules for this forum were sent ahead of time to all candidates. Candidates have agreed to abide by the stated rules of decorum and will refrain from interrupting, personal attacks, or disruptive behavior. These rules will be strictly enforced. Let me briefly explain the question and answer period rules. Questions have not been shared with the candidates. We thank all those community members who sent us recommendations about local issues. I will pose the questions. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to respond. Less or more time may be allowed for selected questions. I will state this change clearly. We are using a countdown timer, which is visible to all the candidates. It shows elapsed time and alerts the candidates when there are 15 seconds left and when time is up. Time limits on answers will be strictly enforced. When you see the timer turn red and hear the chime, you're done. Order of the questions. I will change the starting order for each question, rotating between the two of you. Since there are two candidates, that means that you will be answering question one, then maybe two questions in a row each time. So one of you will alternate being first with the question. The order for the first question, randomly selected, is DARYL Williams, and then we will go to Julio Cortes. Let's begin. First question goes to Mr. Williams. What qualifications and experience make you strong candidates for this position?
Well, I've worked for the Tulalip tribes for the last 4.5 decades on environmental issues, with over 30 of those years dealing with legislative issues. I've also been appointed by governors for different commissions. Governor Locke appointed me to the Puget Sound Water Quality Action Team, which I served on for 10 years. Governor Inslee appointed me to the State Conservation Commission back in 2015, and I'm currently the chair of that commission. So I'm used to working the legislative process in Olympia. And well, I've got a long history of working on environmental issues. My family has a history of working on social and health issues as well. And I have a little bit of experience in those other areas. The last couple of years with Tulalip, I've also assisted our education and law enforcement departments with legislative issues as well. So I do have a fair amount of experience actually working the processes, and look forward to representing our district in Olympia.
Thank you. Same question for Mr. Cortes.
Thank you, Vicki. Well, I have almost a decade of experience working with at-risk youth and families in the homelessness sector. I worked for Cocoon House, a nonprofit that serves at-risk and homeless youth. For 3 years, I did direct service. So I directly worked with youth and their families who were either experiencing homelessness or close to experiencing homelessness. And, I was able to hear directly from them about the issues that they face. Shortly after the 3-year mark, I started working as a public relations manager for Cocoon House, where then my role changed to tell the story of the youth that we were serving. Part of that was going down to Olympia and testifying for and against bills that were going to be affecting the population we served. it was a truly, again, eye-opening experience. I was able to take the youth down to Limpia with me sometimes so they can tell their own story. After about 9 years, I transitioned over to work for the city of Everett in their communications and economic development departments, where then I was tasked to work to try and expand our economic vitality here in the city of Everett. After the pandemic, it quickly switched over to economic recovery. So I worked closely with small and medium business owners around the city to make sure that they were going to survive the pandemic and come out stronger on the other end. So I feel well adjusted. I'm part of 5 other boards at the moment that keep me pretty busy, including leadership in Snohomish County, Fiscal Advisory Committee for the Everett Public School District. So I feel well-rounded and ready to provide support in Olympia.
Thank you. Mr. Cortes, the next question goes to you first. What are 2 or 3 major issues that need to be addressed by the Washington State Legislature?
Great question. Well, first, I think I've been doorbelling for a little over a month now, and one of the major issues that continues to pop up is housing affordability in our area. And a lot of folks are dealing with housing affordability. A lot of medium income and lower income folks are a paycheck or 2 away from losing their home and then getting added to the many homeless individuals that we see in our community. So housing affordability is definitely one. Public safety is another one that I continue to hear from voters about. I work closely with the Everett Police Department in my day job, and the dangers that we're seeing out in the streets are a lot different than they were 20, 30 years ago. The drugs that are out there have a higher effect on individuals' violent tendencies. So I think we need to support our law enforcement a little bit better with specialized staff that's better able to respond to those type of calls with tools that they need to respond to those type of calls, and make sure that our police departments better reflect our communities of color. So public safety is another one that I continue to hear from folks about, and our economic vitality. Right now, coming out of the economic devastation that the pandemic gave us, making sure that we support our small and medium business owners, but also their employees, is something that we really need to do to make sure that we come out of this pandemic strong, because they're the backbone of our community.
Thank you. Mr. Williams, same question.
Yeah, well, I've worked in the environmental field most of my life, so that's a high priority for me. But looking at the district, drug abuse, mental health, and homelessness are big issues. And part of the homelessness issue is because of our lack of housing, as Julio stated. Our industry and building new homes has really fallen behind, especially during the pandemic. And we need to provide some incentives to get more housing built and more affordable housing built. Because there's the lack of housing nationally is a problem. It's just driving up cost because we have more people looking for homes than we have homes available. With the mental health conditions, law enforcement isn't really trained properly to handle those issues when they're called. And we need to have better training for the police officers. We need more care facilities to handle for mental cases. And we have a lot of people who are just don't have the mental capacity to get by on their own. Some of them get good, strong support from their families, which is great. Others don't, and the state needs to help those families support their family members. So, time's up.
Thank you. Both of you mentioned homelessness. So, Mr. Williams, you first. Please speak to ways that you would address homelessness.
Yeah, that's a big issue in this area. I'm by no means an expert with homelessness, but I would like to work with the experts in the field and community members to try to come up with things that will work for our district and statewide. The same processes won't necessarily work in every community, so we need to have flexibility in whatever we adopt by the state to work in various communities across the state. But I want to work with the experts in the field along with the community members that are kind of trying to deal with homelessness in their own communities to figure out solutions that could work. And, we have to be able to talk to each other and figure out how to develop compromises to where we can make things work in the communities. Because if the communities are against whatever we adopt at the state level, it's not going to work. So we really do need to have community involvement.
Thank you. Mr. Cortes.
Yeah, thank you. Great question. So, there's a few strategies that have been shown to be incredibly successful. Most recently, one, there was a city that made a big dent in their homelessness population through the Housing First model. I think the Housing First model is something that's proven time and time again to be very, very effective, and it's something that I think could be implemented in many different communities in our state. So, another option that I've seen work really well in the city of Everett is through the pallet shelter program, where small 10 by 10 housing units were built for 25 individuals. When those first units were filled, 17 individuals were not wanting services at all. They were just wanting the shelter, and that was provided to them. About a month later, 15 of the 17 individuals started requesting services, and that's because they were housed first. They met their basic need. They built relationships with staff that were on site to make sure that they had access to services. And the 15 out of the 17 that didn't want services, 15 actually requested services. And I think that's something that we need to do. We need to make sure that individuals first have a roof over their head, a stable environment for them to grow and really build relationships with staff that's available. We need to hear from them. We need to make sure that we talk to the individuals that are out on the street to make sure that they get what they need when they need it. We need to meet them where they are. So there are strategies out there that we can look at a state level that I think would be very successful for these individuals.
Thank you. Next question goes to you first, Mr. Cortes. As hospital mergers happen with greater frequency, do you have concerns about limited healthcare options in religious hospital systems? What actions, if any, would you recommend?
I do have some, it's something that I'm not incredibly educated on, and I look forward to getting more educated on that. But, health services need to be available to everybody that needs them when they need them. Hospital mergers, are done usually for a business reason. That's all right, but we need to make sure that healthcare is available to anyone that needs it, no matter their religion status or their, how much money they have, their economic status. So it's definitely a concern. It's something that I, as a legislator, I would want to look at a little bit closer, hear from individuals who are having experiences in these hospitals to see why they're having those experiences and what policies we can put in place to make sure that healthcare is available to the individuals that need it when they need it, because these are lives that could be at stake a lot of times, and even seeking out the services for some people can be very difficult if they feel that when they arrive they're going to be judged or they're not going to be served. Like I said, I'd like to get more educated on that topic, and I hope that we hear from individuals who are actually experiencing the situation, as well as from administrators at these hospitals, to see where we can find a middle ground and a balance to make sure that folks get what they need.
Thank you. Mr. Williams.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, back in my younger days, I was actually a volunteer firefighter EMT and volunteered at the hospitals that we had at Everett. In those days, we had both General Hospital and Providence. And towards the end of my time as a EMT, we did have the hospital merger between Providence and General, and could see some of the changes that took place with the merger. Because General Hospital was a county-run hospital and was sure to make sure that all patients that came in were cared for. It wasn't quite so easy after the merger, having a privately owned hospital. And of course, now with the concerns with abortion nationally, having hospitals in the state, which are primarily Catholic hospitals now, may end up reducing some of the services they provide as the national rules change with the potential Supreme Court decision coming up. So I think there are a lot of concerns about hospital mergers, especially with church-run hospitals, and the stance that's taken against abortion and the type of care that the mothers need when they're pregnant. So.
Thank you. So this next question goes to you first, Mr. Williams. How could the education funding system be adjusted to continue to improve equity in public schools, even in the event of a local levy failure?
Yeah, well, the funding for schools in this state is not the greatest. While the state has some funding for the school districts, they primarily rely on property taxes. And schools in low-income areas just don't have the money that the schools in the high-income areas like Redmond have. And it really cuts down on the ability of the schools to really compete with each other. We really need to be able to balance out the funding using state funds and also kind of prioritize state funding for schools that are doing the worst. Unfortunately, some of the lowest ranked school districts of the state are also next to Indian reservations. So the tribes are getting a lower level of education than most other minorities, even in this state. So we do need to balance out funding and have our state Department of Education really work with the school districts that are struggling to help them bring in better quality teachers, bring in better management so that these schools are run properly. But we really need to balance out the funding system we use for schools. Relying on property taxes for most of their funding is not a good way to go. So that's one of the things we need to change. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cortes.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, the funding from schools, so when we have the conversations, I sit on the fiscal advisory committee for the Everett Public School District, and I think that one of the things that we need to do when levies don't pass in not only our district but for other locations around the state is look at the upside down tax code that we have here in Washington State. That's something that I really want to look at when I get down to Olympia. The upside down tax code, I think could if we can make sure that we change that in ways that are going to be giving funding to our school districts, especially like Mr. Williams says it in lower income districts. That should be a priority for every single legislator in our state. The children that need to be educated at the highest possible level in every grade that they attend. And when a school district doesn't have the ability to offer the extracurricular activities that provide, like band, sports, those provide a lot of good for the youth as well. And those are usually the ones that get cut when levies don't pass, in order to make sure that we're taking care of our, the basic needs of the school, like paying teachers. So I think that looking at the tax code in Washington State and seeing how we can adjust that to make sure that our schools are better taken care of it would be a great first step to take.
Thank you. So Mr. Cortes, this time it goes to you first. If elected, what ideas do you have for working productively with your staff, colleagues, and members of the public whose ideas are different from yours?
Well, having the conversations for sure. Something that I really, really want to do, and I've begun doing it since I started this campaign, is I want to hear from everyone. I'm somebody that's going to be available to folks, whether it's a phone call, meeting in person, having a beer. I want to make sure that I hear from individuals that are on a different side of the aisles, that think differently than I do, because that's how I'm going to get the best education on that topic. I want to hear from subject matter experts. I can't do this alone, right? So I want to hear from as many legislators who have been in legislature for a while. I want to hear from the homeless individuals that are out on the street on what they need. I want to hear from school teachers about the needs that they have. I want to hear from union workers to find out what their needs are. That's how I think we're going to be successful as legislators down in Olympia. And not only being available to people, but also going out and meeting folks where they are, especially our BIPOC populations, our minority populations that may not have the ability to be out in Olympia or may not have the ability to come to one of my events. I'm out right now and meeting them in their own communities and doing my best to make sure that I go to them so they have access to me and I have access to them, right? A dialogue back and forth is always going to produce good results if it's done correctly. And that's something that I'm committed to doing not only now during the campaign, but after we're down in Olympia as well.
Thank you. Mr. Williams.
Yeah, well, working in the environmental field to get to the improvements in environmental management we have is because of listening to everybody and trying to work with each other to figure out ways we can solve each other's problems. With the timber industry, we created the timber, fish, and wildlife process back in the 1990s. And I was in the middle of all that. And, we worked with the industry. We listened to what they had to say. They listened to what we had to say. And we were able to negotiate rules that the timber industry voluntarily requested to have turned into state law. I've worked with the agricultural industry over the last 24, 25 years, and I've developed a good relationship with most of them. When I talked to the Dairy Federation about getting an endorsement, their executive director said, gee, not used to having Democrats that don't hate us, and you're one we actually like to work with. So, I've got experience working with both sides of the aisle and, working with people with different opinions. I think the only way we make headway in this state is by actually talking to each other and negotiating with each other to come up with solutions that work for everybody. So, that's the way I'd want to work as a legislator, is to keep an open mind and work with everyone the best I can.
Thank you. So, Mr. Williams, you first this time. Are there changes to the Washington State redistricting process that you would support? And if so, what would they be?
I really have not looked at redistricting rules in the state that close. I think the state has one of the better processes in the nation, since we do use a bipartisan process for redistricting. But I would need to look at the rules and talk to people that understand them better and figure out what changes might make sense. But I am happy that we have one of the better states for managing redistricting. And but there's always room for improvement, and I'm always happy to talk with people that really understand the systems and are experts in how they work on trying to develop improvements as time goes on. So it's not something I have any ideas on right now, but it's something I'd be willing to look forward to talking to the folks that are experts in the area.
Thank you. Mr. Cortes.
Yeah, great. So yeah, great question again. So again, I think I need to learn a little bit more about the redistricting process statewide. But one of the things that I did that I did like is the bipartisanship of the redistricting process. I'd like to see more transparency, more proactive communication with the public about the process. That's something that I feel like if the public had a little bit more information on the actual process and timeline of how redistricting works in our state, it could be, I think, just beneficial for everyone. And I totally understand that folks can see the redistricting process as not as exciting, but I feel like being proactive with information about how it works, the timeline, and any involvement that the public can have or distribute to friends, family, to get more and more people informed about the process, I think will only benefit the process because more the voters are involved. But like Mr. Williams, I myself need to get a little bit more information on the process and learn more about it.
Thank you. Next question goes to you first, Mr. Cortes. If the U.S. Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade, would you support making any changes to existing state laws regarding access to abortion?
Yeah, great question. And, I'm very concerned about that decision nationwide, but I do feel thankful that we live in a state where abortion rights are protected. I'm 110% committed to make sure that abortion rights not only get continue to be protected, but also expanded to make sure that they're available to everybody that needs it. I've had a lot of conversations about this with a few different groups, and like I said, we're lucky to live in a state that's going to be protecting these rights, but at the same time, there is concern about other people from other states coming to a sanctuary like Washington State is, and having too many individuals trying to seek the services that we are able to provide, and then prolonging the treatment times. So that is a concern that I have around that, but I really hope that the right decision is made, and we need to make sure that abortion is available to all people, and make sure that we continue to not only protect but expand the accessibility, because a lot of times it could be a life and death situation for a lot of individuals, and expanding the ability for them to have that service in their community is important as well.
Thank you. Mr. Williams.
Yeah, I think we're fortunate to be in a state that's as liberal as it is towards abortion. There are many mothers that want to be able to have that option, especially when their own life may be at threat due to conditions of birth. And we really need to have the facilities available that can do abortions. And with the Supreme Court potentially overturning Roe versus Wade, or being very likely to do so, going by the news reports, we are likely to be a state that's going to have people coming in, particularly from states like Idaho, that are likely to adopt strong laws not allowing abortion. And we need to make sure we have the facilities available so that the patients don't have to wait weeks or months to have the procedures done, because that could make conditions worse. And we'll probably need to adopt some stronger laws regulating hospitals so that Catholic-run hospitals can't just say we're not going to do it. And other hospitals that may be run by organizations that don't believe in abortions. So we need to be able to make sure they're available. Right now, I think only about half our hospitals will actually perform abortions, and that's a problem.
Thank you. So, Mr. Williams, this one goes to you first. What legislation will you support to address the need for local responses to climate change, including through the comprehensive plans for the Growth Management Act?
That's a good question. Tulalip was strongly involved in kind of creating the legislative language that was adopted on climate change. So I think, there's a lot of good things within the climate change bills that have been passed in this state, including, raising money to do mitigation that'll help to sequester carbon. And, we're off to a good start. But I think I'd really want to see how the current laws work before really making any real major changes, because we really adopted some good laws over the last 2 years, but they need time to implement to see how well they work. And I think it's as we're implementing these laws that issues will come up that need to be addressed. But at this point, I can't predict what those issues will be. there's always things that come up that you don't expect, and there's always unexpected consequences that you need to deal with. So as we move forward, I want to really pay attention to what those unexpected consequences are, and then look at how we can address those so that we're meeting the needs of our communities, as well as combating climate change. And, in the energy sector, we've already done a lot. I know with our local PUD, they're pretty much zero carbon emitting now. They've pretty well eliminated.
Thank you. Mr. Cortes.
Yeah, well, environmental change is something that I'm really passionate about, just because it's going to affect future generations, and it's already affecting this generation. The global warming is progressing at an incredibly devastating rate. We're seeing it now, and I think, right, yeah, we do need a little bit of time to make sure that we see what adjustments need to be made to the law, and find that balance. Right now, I think our district is very strong as far as finding alternative forms of energy that can be used. That's something that the state law, I need a little bit more education on, to see, again, like Mr. Williams stated, to see how that's going to pan out. But I think that's something that we could do as a district, is try to encourage companies to transition away from fossil fuels, and to encourage the movement of companies to our district that can offer an avenue of transitioning from the folks that are currently working in the fossil fuel industry, and transition them over to working for newer companies who are looking at renewable sources for energy. The last couple of years, we've been able to attract companies like Julio, TerraPower, Inform, who are strong in climate change. So finding ways to not only fight climate change, but also provide opportunities for our workers to transition to the new industry would be something that I'd look for.
Thank you. Starting with you, Mr. Cortes. What do you believe are the 3 best ideas for reducing the likelihood of violent firearms incidents in our county and our state?
Yeah, another great question. So, again, I'm thankful to be living in Washington State that has, common sense gun laws that are here to protect the majority of us. But, at the end of the day, we're only going to be as safe as the nation is, right? Because folks can still buy, larger guns in our neighboring states and bring them over and cause some real harm. But, I think one is, we need to make sure that we invest into mental health services for not only our youth, but our young adults, for everyone. Mental health services right now are crucial to make sure that folks can find a healthy way to express themselves. So I think investment in mental health is very important. Continuing to strengthen our gun safety laws is another way that we will make sure to keep all of our people safe, because people should be able to go to work. They should be able to go to a mall. They should be able to drop off their kids and know that their kids are going to be safe all day. So strengthening our gun safety laws is another way that we'll be able to find success. And a third is increasing revenue that comes from weapon sales that then we could use to prevent disasters like the ones we've seen recently around the nation is the third that I would say.
Thank you. Mr. Williams.
Yeah, that's a tough issue to deal with. As Mr. Cortes has said, strengthening our ability to work with mental health patients is really a key to this. Another key is strengthening our background checks to make sure that people are being properly checked before they actually purchase new weapons. And there's really no need for military style automatic weapons for personal use. So I'd be against the fully automatic weapon sales, and even semi-automatics with there's no need for most people to have high capacity weapons that can handle, cartridges that can handle 100 rounds of ammo. That's just not needed. 10 to 15 rounds for hunters is probably all they really need. And but for just protecting your own home, you just don't need those large capacity magazines. But we need to have better safety regulations. People that own and use firearms should be properly trained on how to use them. And we just need to better manage what we can do. And I'm fully supportive of hunters having proper high-powered rifles.
Thank you.
But, yeah.
Thank you. We come to our last question now. And this is the question to you first, Mr. Williams. What additional issues or information would you like to bring to the attention of the community? Anything we haven't asked, anything you want to enlarge upon further?
Yeah, thank you. I think the one other big issue I have is dealing with wage and benefits. One way for people to not become homeless is to be given wages that they can live on. We have a few cities that have adopted higher minimum wage standards than what the state has, but we really need to have higher wages statewide because people just can't live on the minimum wage of this state. So, people need to have good salaries that they can live on and benefits for health care and retirement that'll meet their needs going into the future. So I think that's a big area that we need to work on. And emergency services are also drastically underfunded, whether it's the police departments or fire departments. Fire departments like schools are reliant on property taxes. So if you're in a poorer area, they just don't have the funding that the bigger districts have with stronger economies. And we need to really overhaul our tax system so that's not such a backward system and that everyone's paying their fair share, because there's just a lot of local tax districts that are reliant on property taxes that shouldn't be totally reliant on it. So our tax system really needs a complete overhaul.
Thank you. Mr. Cortes.
Yeah, thanks. So, definitely the overhaul of the tax system, something that I mentioned earlier, Mr. Williams mentioned now, and I totally agree with that. But another thing that I really want to kind of focus on and make sure people know is that, I want to make sure that we start to diversify our economy a little bit more by attracting companies to our district that are going to provide higher wages for our workers and give more options for our community to not only get the higher wages, but benefits through those companies. And, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, we've been able to attract some green sector companies to our district the last couple of years. And that's something that I want to expand on to not only fight climate change, but also provide more jobs to our industry or to our community. And the other piece is transportation infrastructure. The package that just passed, I think, was incredible. It's a game changer, I think, for our region. And it's something that we need to continue to focus on. We're going to need more funding to make sure that our transportation infrastructure is set up to take on, the incredible number of folks that are going to be moving to our region in the next 20 years. We need to be ready for that. And not only through our transportation infrastructure, but also our housing. We need to make sure that we continue to diversify our housing options for folks. So we have a place for every type of lifestyle. So those are the three that I'd like to
Thank you. The League appreciates these candidates for joining us and for running for office. A recording of this forum and others will be available on the League of Women Voters of Snohomish County website and on our YouTube channel. Find links at lwvsnoho.org. That is lwvsnoho.org. We encourage you to explore additional information about these and all the candidates. The Snohomish County voter pamphlet will be mailed to residences starting on July 13th. Vote411.org, sponsored by the League of Women Voters, is another good source for nonpartisan voting information. Ballots will be mailed on July 15th, and Election Day is August 2nd. Please vote. This concludes our candidate forum. Again, thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.